From catching speeders to entertaining readers, there are things in life that matter, and then there are things that don't. In this video, John P. Weiss talks about the things that matter from his unique perspective as a former police chief, now writer, photographer, and artist. He shares his thoughts on what life should be about and why focusing on what truly matters is essential. Welcome to the Wellness Driven Life Show. You're in for a wellness driven ride. I'm so pleased to introduce our guest to you today. Let me tell you about him. Chief Weiss was dedicated and has dedicated his life to law enforcement and serving the community. He started as a patrol officer in 1990. He worked up the ranks, holding various positions, including field training officer, composite sketch artist, detective, sergeant, training manager, impact weapons instructor, peer counselor, hostage negotiator, lieutenant, operations commander, and the list goes on. In 2016, he was awarded Man of the Year by the Scotts Valley Chamber of Commerce. Chief Weiss is highly respected within the community and is known for his dedication to protecting and serving the people of Scotts Valley. Now, a retired police chief, John P. Weiss is the author, artist, and educator who writes elegant essays about life lessons, which he illustrates with photography and drawings. His work has been featured in The Guardian, NBC News, Becoming Minimalist, Mr. Feelgood, Austin Art Talk, Good Men Project, Thrive Global, and many other sites. Over 49,000 readers follow his weekly essays on medium.com, including yours truly, and over 12,000 subscribers to Saturday Letters. Please help me welcome John Weiss.
Well, thank you, April. What an introduction.
Oh, my pleasure. It's great to have you on the Wellness Driven Life Show.
It's great to be here.
So tell us a little bit. I mean, you've been on this incredible journey. You've got this incredible past of many years in law enforcement through all of those various roles and more. I couldn't even read the list, John. And if I happen to call you sir throughout this, please forgive me because it's sometime ingrained. But I want to know a little bit more about your journey from the law enforcement background into this creative aspect.
Sure. Well, again, thank you for having me on your show. I think it's great what you're doing as a former law enforcement person yourself, as a deputy, to now be helping people to live a wellness-driven life. My story is I have always been a creative person. My father was an administrative law judge. He was a very creative guy. He painted on the weekends. And I think he was trying to steer me in my life towards a career in the law. But I didn't really want to be an attorney. I was more interested in drawing and painting and things like that. But there was a time when a deputy sheriff came to my high school class and spoke about his career in law enforcement. And it intrigued me. I thought it was interesting that every day was different for him, that he got to help people, that there was some adventure in his career. And so I started to formulate an idea that, hey, maybe I could get into law enforcement. That might be a exciting career. And so that's exactly what happened. I ended up graduating, going to college, studying criminal justice at the university. And then when I graduated, my father convinced me to go to grad school. So I spent 2 more years and and earned a master's degree in administration of justice. And then I started applying at agencies, and the Scotts Valley Police Department picked me up. But I always had a love of art, creativity, writing. And so throughout my law enforcement career, I became known as the cartoonist. I was always drawing cartoons of my colleagues. I was always making fun of our exploits. I started to moonlight as a political cartoonist for the local newspapers in my community, and that was a lot of fun until the problem happened that I was getting more and more well known as a cartoonist, and so people were calling the police department to complain if they disagreed with the political orientation of my cartoons.
Oh,
And
wow.
so the police chief calls me into his office and says, "Weiss, you got to make up your mind, either be a cop or be a cartoonist or an artist, but you can't be both because this is a problem." So I had to move away from cartooning, and I started taking up landscape painting. And I put together a website, and I started painting, and I studied landscape painting in Idaho with a very renowned painter, Scott Christensen. And around the same time, I also started blogging and writing more on my website, writing about creativity and art. And so that took on a life of its own. And the original plan was to retire and then become a full-time fine artist, painter. But my writing started to take off more. I was cross-posting on another website called medium.com, and they pay you also based on how well your articles do. And I started to grow a following there. And my writing sort of grew more from just creativity and art to talking about life lessons and how to live a better life and personal development, things like that. And I would pair my articles with cartoons and then more recently with some of my black and white photography. And it just took off. And so that's sort of how this creative life unfolded. And then I started to publish a couple books. And here we are today now. I retired a few years early from law enforcement to have a full-time life as a writer and an artist.
Well, that's a really cool story. And I love how, they told you at one point, you can't do both. You can't, you got to choose one or the other, and how you must have felt in that moment. But I love how you shifted. Instead of not doing it entirely, you shifted into, a different scenery. Right. So instead of doing the cartoons, you did landscaping, you started painting and going that direction. What I find really interesting is that now that you come into the retirement arena and you thought that you were going to pursue and continue to pursue that landscaping, how it kind of circled back into the cartooning and in teaching people life lessons with your writing. And John, that is how I found you a few years ago on Medium. I really love the platform. I've learned so much from the writers there. And, you were a breath of fresh air because you and I both share a law enforcement background. So there was that familiar aspect of I can't even say it. Familiarity. Oh, goodness. Aspect of it. And so, but you didn't really talk about law enforcement. So it wasn't about that. It was just that you came from there. And so you had an understanding of and an awareness of what that world looks like.
Sure. Well, my law enforcement background does permeate into some of my essays and stories. But I don't write with an orientation of just a law enforcement audience. I try to write much more broadly. But the beauty of a law enforcement career is that it exposes you, I think, to the full constellation of human frailty, human beauty, everything in between. I mean, as you know, we see everything in law enforcement. We see people at their worst, and we see sometimes people at their best.
Yeah.
And I took a lot of lessons from my colleagues. That I worked with some really remarkable people that I have so much respect for in my agency and in the county where I worked. From the dispatchers to the officers to assistant district attorneys to some politicians that I worked with, people that really were committed to making their community a better place. And so I learned a lot of lessons in my career. I was always observing and noticing experiences, from death cases to suicides to accidents to people on the margins of society that we were trying to help. And so a lot of those life lessons and things I've learned about people, I've tried to take those lessons and then expand upon them in my writing and in the stories and in the articles I write about. So sometimes I may write an article that doesn't mention my law enforcement career, but I may have a lesson in there about forgiveness, and it comes from some of the things I saw in my career or on second chances. So it's amazing how law enforcement can be such an educational career if you open your eyes to it. It can teach you so much about people and about how much we're all very much the same and what we want in our lives. And my career, I'm very thankful for my career. I think it's made me a much better writer.
Absolutely. I think if you allow it, you can. What I appreciated about you is you did take those lessons to a different level.
Yeah.
You created wisdom from those experiences, and you're now sharing it with the world. And that is what I appreciate about you, John.
Oh, thank you.
Sir. And can you share what is one of the most challenging situations and lessons that you had while working in that field?
I think one of the first things that struck me was how much people lie. I was blessed to grow up in a wonderful town, and I had a wonderful family. My father, as I mentioned, was an administrative law judge. He was an amateur historian. He was a very moral, ethical man. My mother worked before I was born, and then she became a homemaker and raised my sister and I. And she was a loving, wonderful mother that showed me so much about humor and laughter and living life with gusto. And my sister was a health nut, and an avid reader. And so I just grew up in this wonderful family of support. And I grew up in Los Gatos, California, which now is sort of part of the mecca of the nouveau rich in Silicon Valley. And so I really had a blessed childhood. I didn't want for much. I got to play tennis on the tennis team. And so I grew up in a world that was really full of wonderful people that were supportive. And I was not exposed that much to the harder sides of society. And so going off to college and having a great time in grad school and then finally going into law enforcement, what I wasn't expecting was how much people lie. It blew my mind. I mean, it wasn't just people you would expect to lie. The Hell's Angel you'll pull over who's lying to you about the drugs he's got on him. But I mean, it was the soccer mom in the Mercedes that would blow through a red light and completely deny, no, I stopped at that light, officer. I don't know what you're talking about. And everything in between. I guess I saw just really how fragile people were, and it opened my eyes early in my law enforcement career. I mean, I read about these things through my education, but you can't really appreciate it until you're in the profession and you see how people really are. So I guess that was one of the things that surprised me was how much people lie, and they do it so easily, either out of embarrassment or to get out of a problem. And it doesn't matter socioeconomic, racial background, none of that matters. It was across the board. So that was an eye-opener to me. But on the flip side, I also started to see tremendous beauty and inspiration. I would see it sometimes in, a homeless guy I would talk to, and I'd hear his story, and I'd see how he would help people, even though he didn't have to, and think, wow, I know some people that are really successful that probably wouldn't, cross the street to help this lady get her groceries in the car like you just did. And so that also opened my eyes. So I think in many ways I had a formal education through private schools and then universities. Then I had a real life education when I got into law enforcement and learned a little bit more about humanity and what people are like, both good and bad.
Yes, I can absolutely
You can relate to that?
Yes,
Yeah.
I can. And so we're gonna drop off and go to our first quick commercial. And when we come back, I would love for you to share, because you have gone through so many difficult situations, or you have seen, the worst of the worst in people and also the beauty in people. But when we're talking about the difficulties, what inspiration would you give to someone experiencing difficulties and difficult times?
Sure.
When we come back.
Bella Grace Skincare. It's more than skincare. It's your shortcut to a more youthful, healthy, and beautiful you. Step 1. Cleanse with the enzyme collagen cleanser. Gently exfoliates and removes dead skin cells. Brightens and evens out skin tones. Repairs damage caused by environmental stressors. Protects skin's barrier function. Use daily for clean, smooth, glowing skin. Experience the Bella Grace Enzyme Collagen Cleanser for a refreshing start and a radiant finish. Step 2. Treat with the Dewy Serum. Deeply hydrates and locks in moisture. Protects from free radical damage. Targets multiple signs of aging. Boosts microcirculation, revealing a youthful, radiant, dewy complexion. Dewy Serum goes beyond ordinary skincare, leading you to a realm of glowing, rejuvenated beauty. Step 3. Replenish with the Collagen Plumping Moisturizer. Reduces fine lines and wrinkles. Deeply hydrates. Boosts collagen production. Firms and smooths the skin. Experience an intense surge of moisture that leaves your skin feeling supple and soft to the touch. Celebrate your skin and elevate your beauty with Bella Grace Skincare.
So I want to reroute that question a little bit. What I
Sure.
want to ask is what would you say to our audience, and how do you find inspiration in difficult times?
How do you find inspiration in difficult times? Well, you know, it's going to be different sometimes for different people. We all have different interests and different needs. So sometimes it's hard to give a one-fit-all answer. But I can think of a couple of things. For me, I think one of them starts with family. Family is like a refuge in your life. If you have a healthy family, if you have a good family, or it could be your friends too. If you're not with anyone or don't have any immediate family. But I think that's the first thing, is having a refuge in your family and friends. They are truly just gifts in life. And sometimes it's easy for us when we are struggling with our careers or with a transition. Sometimes we forget that is such a huge resource. My son and I, we go out to dinner together on weekends when my wife is working. My wife is a hospice nurse, and so she works on weekends a couple of days a week, 12-hour shifts. So it's just my son and I. And we go out to dinner together, and I know I've got him for another year. Well, not even a year. I got him till next, about a year. And then he graduates and he'll be off starting his life in the Air Force as a second lieutenant. So I'm cherishing these evenings with him on the weekends where we have dinner together, because when I think about things that I want to change in my life or improve, this time I spend with him is so inspirational. He talks about his life and what he's working on, and I bounce ideas off him, and he gives me great insights. He's just a remarkable young man. So I would say to your listeners that one of the first resources during difficult times is your family and your friends. They're precious, and don't forget them, and invest in them, and let them help you. Beyond that, I would say that for me, books and literature are a great resource, because when we read, we remind ourselves that there are other people that came before us who have gone through tremendous struggles. I think it's easy for us to forget that when we get so wrapped up in our own lives, and whether we're going through a financial problem, or we're trying to get over an addiction or a difficult relationship, or we feel bad about ourselves because we haven't lost the weight and we want to be a different person in our mind than we currently are. It's so easy to get down on ourselves and feel bad about ourselves. And I find sometimes turning to literature and books is a great resource. Now, you can do that online. You can try to do that with some movies, but I'm often disappointed. I don't watch television that much anymore, because so much of it I find is superficial. There's a few gems here and there, and some great movies, but a lot of times I can't find it. And then when you go online, there's so much superficial stuff that I think sometimes makes people feel bad. It's and they look at these images on YouTube or on Instagram of people running around the beaches that live in the laptop lifestyle, and they feel bad that's not them, or what are they doing wrong, or how come they don't look like that person. And so I've just found that books written by people that have been edited, that have great stories, can inspire you. And like, for instance, Viktor Frankl wrote a book many years ago, Man's Search for Meaning. Here's a man who survived the Holocaust, lost his entire family. Talk about a man who could easily have slipped into despair and given up, who suffered tremendously. And yet, he survived it. He lived on, and he wrote this beautiful book about how it doesn't matter what happens to you in the world. All that matters is how you respond to it. You have the ultimate decision to make on how you want to respond to whatever the struggle is. It's up to you to decide that. So that book is a great reminder for people that are going through their own struggles, that you get to decide how you want to respond to these things. If you're unhappy about yourself, okay, let's start with small steps. How can you change that? You don't like your career? Okay, let's start with small steps. How do I want to respond to that? Do I want to complain forever about it and feel down and depressed and sit on the couch and watch NCIS reruns? Or do I want to start getting online and looking for different jobs, new skills? So I just think that, your family, literature, and then the last thing would be your passions. When we're dealing with difficult times, if you can set aside time, take the hours you spend on YouTube and then go follow your passion instead. Whether it's, if you're a runner, whether you're a painter, whether you're into music, you can always find time, photography, to dive into your passions a little bit. And that always has exponential returns for me when I do it. When I get down about something or get frustrated that I haven't reached a goal, if I take time out of my day to pursue some of my passions, sometimes it can feel like a guilty pleasure too. Like, I'm wasting time. I should be working on this. I shouldn't be out here taking, street photography or drawing cartoons. But when I do that, it just resets me. It just gives me a chance to settle into myself and get lost in my passion. And it recharges me a little bit. So family, friends, great books and literature that you can escape into and learn about other people's lives and inspiration. And then diving into your passions would be my 3 pieces of advice.
Awesome. Well, brilliant saying the writing aspect as a writer, because everyone should be going to your writing and reading them, because they are inspirational. And you and I both know that NCIS is not real and does not depict the reality of what a law enforcement career is, or the happenings.
I don't mean to pick on them. I mean, I'm sure,
I'll pick on them with you.
We all have our TV shows that are silly, and we're escaping reality. So there's nothing wrong with, sometimes you need to escape into a TV show. So I don't want to, say that that's a terrible thing. I just think that if you want to really feed your soul, there's some great places to do that besides just, old TV shows and news programs and all that stuff.
Well, I love that. Really, the sense of community, your first one, family, honing in on, the people that we have in our life that we surround ourselves with. We're all here to support each other. And I am a huge advocate for community. And, if you don't have a lot of people in your life, make that happen. Because, we are here for each other. Absolutely. People happen to die of loneliness, believe it or not. It is a thing.
Yep.
And
it's a killer.
It is.
It's a killer.
Sense of community is huge. And so, yes. And then informing yourself. I love Viktor Frankl's work. It's an inspiration for anyone on this planet. So I think it should be a must read. So thank you so much. I had a comment come through, John, and I want to, I've had a few. So I also want to open it up to our viewers. If you have any questions, please put them in the chat and we'll answer. But I'm going to bring 1 or 2 of them in. Manly says, who influenced you as an artist, especially considering cartoons?
So the cartoons started very early in life. I think I was in grade school, and I just started noticing in newspapers cartoons. And it wasn't so much comic strip cartoons, it was editorial cartoons. I love the graphic square cartoon, and I didn't understand the politics of a lot of these cartoons when I was younger. I didn't read much about politics or understand that, but I loved the drawings. And some of the early influences for me were Jeff McNelly, who was a 3-time Pulitzer Prize winning editorial cartoonist. And people who look at my drawings will probably see that influence. I do a lot of cross hatching and detail. I like my cartoons to have weight to them, which means that there's a lot of lines in them and they're really fleshed out. So even though I'm a bit of a minimalist in my personal life, how I want to live my life, I don't like a lot of clutter and things like that. When it comes to cartoons, I'm a maximalist. I really like to put a lot of detail into my characters. Another influence was Pat Ullapant, who is another political cartoonist. He's still alive, I believe, but he's retired now. Jeff McNelly sadly passed away of lymphoma years ago. Jim Borgman is another cartoonist from Cincinnati, Ohio, who, yeah, I see a comment there. I still don't understand politics. Yeah, you and me both, Manly. I don't understand politics either. It's it's probably why I'm not doing political cartoons anymore. But Jim Borgman is another one who I really admired. I actually wrote to him, and he corresponded with me a little bit when I was a political cartoonist and gave me some great advice. He now is the artist for the very successful comic strip Zits that's still in a lot of newspapers. So those were a few of the cartoonists that inspired me. There were many more. I mean, George Harriman, who drew a comic strip called Crazy Cat many years ago. In fact, Crazy Cat wasn't even in the newspapers when I was a kid. It predated me, but I loved his style. So those are some of the cartoonists that inspired me growing up.
You know, one of them that came to mind for me, John, was is it Charles Schultz?
Charles Schultz, Peanuts, yeah.
Right. So he had all of this influence from World War II.
Yes.
And so, you know, when you consider more of this real traumatizing sort of life and experiences, and, you know, law enforcement has a lot of that aspect too. I mean, you see so many horrific things and things where, in a sense, you get this sense of humor that most people don't understand because it's one way to be able to cope with it.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah,
I think you're right. I mean, there's the gallows humor that you probably know too from law enforcement. Cops sometimes privately amongst themselves can have the worst sense of humor. They can joke about things but it's a pressure valve release. You know, it's a way to let off steam for the terrible things that we see. And you know, I think that my mom used to tell me that I was a sensitive soul as a little boy. I was very sensitive. I'd feel things very deeply. And she was right. And, you know, law enforcement I had so many people that said to me, I can't believe you're in law enforcement. You seem like you should have been a professor or a priest or something like that. So I learned how to cope in law enforcement. I learned how to steel myself and to deal with the ugly things and the sadness and the tragedies. But I don't think that I came out of it entirely unscathed. I think that you learn how to carry it. And so what's happened with me is I've noticed over the years, particularly since I retired and moved into writing, that the things I felt deeply, they're still in me and they come out in my writing. There's times when I write and I move myself with my writing. I stop and I have to take a break because I'm almost moved to tears thinking about something that affected me that now I want to use as fuel to inform my writing to hopefully reach other people. Because I think the best writing is when you can move other people, if it can be poignant, if it can inspire people and move them and create the feelings in them that drives home a message.
What an incredible way to put that. I love that. And I'm going to go back on that because I think for anybody and any writer, I love how you described that when you are moved to tears, where it's such an emotional response based on the memories that you've had, and that you use that as fuel to push you further, and it doesn't just you don't let it stop you. And I think a lot of people, when they're moved that deeply, they just stop and they're not able to move forward. So I love that you said that you use it as fuel to go forward and move on and to inspire others. And I have a bunch of comments flooding in. So I'm just going to go ahead and utilize this. I'm going to bring a couple in because when we're on the topic of writing, we have Charlie said, John, thanks for digesting so much literature and condensing it eloquently, which you absolutely do.
Thanks,
and then
Charlie.
I had another one. Bill says, if you could only suggest 3 pieces of literature to read, what would they be?
Oh my gosh, that's so impossible. I mean, how do you condense down books, into?
Well, Viktor Frankl is one. So
yeah, I mentioned Viktor Frankl. So let me at least share a confession too with maybe your listeners and readers too. Is that I'm not a well-read man. I think it may surprise a lot of people, but I came to books late in life. I was drawing cartoons and lost in my little world of drawing cartoons, and so for me. Reading and books is something that I didn't really turn on to until probably college. And even in college, I am underread in all the classics. I'm finding myself trying to catch up with reading the books that people say you should read. I hear Chekhov and Dostoevsky and all these different authors and from the past, and sometimes they're hard to tackle. I read some of these things and they're confusing. I think when I was in college, I tended to read more contemporary books. So it's very hard for me to condense down when it's like 3 pieces of literature to read. They're all over the board. I did like Hemingway. I love The Old Man, in the Sea. There's something about that story and how it relates to our lives and the struggles. And sometimes we can try to succeed, just like he did catching his big fish, and then the sharks come anyway in life, don't they? The sharks come in and they can take away something that we thought we were going to celebrate. And then what do? We have to pick ourselves up again, and sometimes we need people to help us, just like the little boy helps him in the story. There's a book I read not long ago that's not a classic like Hemingway, but it's David Brooks, who is a columnist who's been around for a number of years. And he wrote a book called, I think it's called The Second Mountain. And what that book was about, and I don't think it's a literature classic, but it's definitely a book that I got a lot out of. It's basically a book that recommends that you form of life that's other-centric instead of self-centric. And what David was talking about there is that, and I've written about this, I think, in a couple of my essays, but early in life, we tend to focus on ourselves. It's natural. We all do that. We're focusing on how to live a better life, how to be more successful, how to look good. So we're very sort of egocentric. And it's very common for most of us to have that. And we climb up the ladder in our lives and we try to reach career success, and we get married perhaps, and maybe we have children, and do many of the things that people look to as a conventional successful life. And we finally get there. We reach maybe the top of our career, and we look around and we're not happy. And we think, well, now what? And that's because we've reached the top of the first mountain in our lives. Now we got to climb down that first mountain and go through the valley and start looking for the second mountain. And what David Brooks talks about in his book, The Second Mountain, is building a life that is other-centric. That's stop focusing so much on yourself and focus on something bigger than yourself. And this happens usually later in life. I think it's rare it happens early in life. It can happen earlier in life. But people tend to, later in life, dive into that second mountain, which is trying to make the world a better place, trying to help people. When I joined the Rotary Club in the police department as a young lieutenant, I did it entirely for egocentric reasons. I was told that it would help my career and it moved me along, and I'd know more people in the community. And I'm embarrassed to admit that I didn't join Rotary back then because I wanted to, get involved in all their projects and help people. But a weird thing happened. I'm in the club and I met some folks that were older than me. A few were retired, some were not. And there was a few like me that were there maybe to move along their career. But I discovered these weekend projects. We were going out and helping elderly couples put railing in their houses so they wouldn't fall down. And they were in tears thanking us for these projects. And something opened up in me, and I realized that, wow, when you help other people, it just it just feeds your soul. You feel so good that you're helping them, and it's not a self-centric thing. You're helping somebody else, but it comes back on you. So David Brooks' The Second Mountain, Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning, and Hemingway's Old Man and the Sea stand out to me. I've got a notion of books behind me here. Most of them are
John, wait a minute. You just
now.
said you were not a reading man.
No. I said I was not a well-read man.
Well-read man. Okay.
But I'm referring more to the classics. I'm trying to play catch up now in my life. I've got a lot of contemporary books and everything from Christopher Hitchens to an amazing story about Carthusian monks that just blew my mind, about these young men that became monks in the most austere Catholic tradition ever, the Carthusians. And they live in cells and don't talk to one another. And who would do that? And so that book blew me away. But I didn't read a lot of the classics. I talked to people who are English literature experts, and I feel inadequate because I want to know what they've read, and I want to be. So that's one of my goals at this stage in my life. And fortunately, I think I'm young enough that I could do that. Is to start turning more and more to some of these classics, and really, I mean, some of them we read in high school, but The Catcher in the Rye and all these different books, and I kind of remember them, but I wasn't focused, and I wasn't ready to receive their wisdom. And now I feel ready, and I'm anxious to. So
I think that's wonderful. And I wrote down some of those because I haven't read The Second Mountain. So that is definitely something that I wrote down for me. And I love that, we definitely get inspired from other people's works, and that's how we find relation and inspiration, and that is the purpose of the Wellness Driven Life show. So we're going to go to another commercial, and when we come back, I'm going to jump into some more of these comments, John, because they are flooding in. So
okay, sounds good.
Tuned.
Give it to me like
So I want to jump into some of these comments, John. And so we've got a few. I just want to hone in on this. Mary says, as a student of philosophy and passionate reader, just want to say how much I love your writing. I enjoy learning from you and being inspired by your art. What a compliment.
Wow. Thank you, Mary. That's really, really wonderful. I appreciate that. That's one of the things that's the joy of writing, is that you get to share your thoughts and your inspirations with people. But one of the best parts is I get these amazing readers that comment on my articles, and they share their insights. They recommend books. They tell me their life stories. I've learned so much from the folks that are kind enough to read my work. I just really appreciate them.
And then Manly says, given enough time and the books you've read may become classics.
Yeah, that's so true. That's so true. Some of the books that have moved me, that are not necessarily well-known books, but they just they touch you in a way. There's an author named Terry Kay that I read years ago, and he wrote this book called To Dance with the White Dog. And it's this lovely little story about a man who lost his wife, and now he has to go to a high school reunion. And he's getting ready to go to this reunion, and he ends up, I think if I recall, not going. He visits his old high school, and he thinks about the past. And while all this is happening at his house, there's this white dog that keeps coming to see him, and the dog just visits. And the dog sometimes jumps up on her hind legs, and he holds the dog's paws, and they walk around and sort of dance together. And it's just such a sweet story. Terry Kay was a Southern writer, as I recall. And I'm going to give a spoiler. This is going to be a spoiler with what happens with this novel. But at the end of this novel, he tells his family about this white dog, and they don't believe him. He says, "Yeah, Dad, you're seeing things. There's no white dog, And he said, "No, the dog comes ever since Mom died, and she dances with me, and she's this wonderful dog, and you got to meet her." And then eventually, he passes away. and the family come to visit his gravesite, where the dirt is still fresh on the dirt, and there's paw prints on the dirt. And I think what Terry Kay was alluding to, that in some way his wife had come back to him as this dog and reassured him and danced with him. It was a simple story, but things like that, they stay with me, and are moving. And so that's the beautiful thing about books, is it just reminds you everybody goes through loss, everybody goes through uncertainty, and the world is a miraculous place. You never know what might happen. Maybe a white dog will show up one day to reassure you when you're down.
Oh, I love that. And, on the topic of compassion, I have a few people that are asking about that specific topic. So I'm going to bring in a few of those. And Charlie says, what are the limits of compassion? Should I give to every panhandler, to any?
Yeah, I know it's hard, isn't it? I mean, we want to help people, but then how do you do that in a way that's meaningful and may not harm them? And also, what are the limits to what you can give, right? You have to take care of yourself too. It's sort of like that old thing in the airplane, when the oxygen tank comes down, or the oxygen mask, you got to put yours on first so you can go on and help, your family and people around you. So, here's how my dad solved that problem with panhandlers. Because where I live here in Las Vegas, I see some of these poor folks, out there on the margins of society struggling, and it's so easy to look past them. And then other times you want to help them, but if you give them money, they may use it for alcohol or drugs or something else. So what do you do? My dad's solution, he used to work in the city of San Francisco, and he used to walk past these folks that were struggling all the time. And what he would do is he donated quite generously to St. Francis. I think it was St. Francis or St. Anthony's Kitchen. It was one of the two. And it was a free kitchen right there in the city, downtown, that they served meals throughout the day. And so anyone who was hungry could go there and get a meal. And he would always stop, and if these guys would ask for money and say, hey, I'm sorry, I don't have any money on me, but if you want to go down, he gave them the address. You can go to St. Francis and they give you a meal. You can get something to eat. And so, that's one way to try to help folks without maybe harming them. But sometimes we can do heroic things. And I always my dad is just an endless font of stories because he's such a remarkable man. My father watched a man, I've written about this, who was an Italian immigrant who was homeless in downtown Los Gatos. He actually lived in the woods in Los Gatos in the hills. He used to make acorn coffee for himself. He was a master wood sculptor. He had no family, and he lived in the woods in a little shack he built for himself. Well, he was in downtown Los Gatos one day, and he got hit by a car, and my dad witnessed this. And he was knocked, I think, a good 20 feet, and he was injured. And my dad, he was an attorney. He went ahead and he basically came to his rescue. He rode with him in the ambulance to the hospital. He learned more about this man. The man's name was Theodore Strollo, or Ted Strollo. And so my dad basically helped to get him benefits. He brought him back after he got out of the hospital to my parents' house, where my mother and my dad nursed him back to health for about a month. I got to know Ted Strollo. And then my dad got him an apartment in downtown Los Gatos, and basically befriended him and became his benefactor. And for the rest of Ted Strollo's life, every Christmas, halfway through the day, my dad and I would drive down to Ted Strollo's apartment. My dad would bring him packages of Stella Dora cookies that Ted Strollo loved, and wool socks, and we'd visit with him for about an hour. And Ted would tell us stories of the old country in his Italian accent, and he used to listen to the radio. And he was just an interesting character. And Ted Strollo had carved this beautiful wooden structure. It was about 5 feet tall, and he called it the Mystery Tree of Life. And he gave it to my father as a gift. It was beautiful. It had wooden balls carved in the middle of it that he had to carve out, and they were in the middle. Just unbelievable artistry. And when Ted Strollo died, my father secured him a burial plot, I think in Saratoga. And eventually my father, I think, donated the Mystery Tree of Life to an Italian arts organization. But imagine the lesson that my dad gave me as a young boy of helping this man that was hit by a car. Now, look, all of us can't just bring a homeless individual home. Some of these folks are struggling with alcohol issues or mental health issues.
Mhm.
Ted Strollo didn't have those issues. He was just poor and trying to live on his own and struggling. And that was a time where my dad could help him. But I think we all have opportunities like that to be charitable, whether it's to give a person a meal or to donate to an organization, a professional organization that can help people. So probably a long-winded answer, but that's one way you can help folks like that, and also not use yourself up. I mean, you can't give away all your money. You need to survive too. So you give what you can, and you do what you can. Sometimes it's nothing more than opening the door or just smiling and saying hello to a person who's struggling, to recognize their humanity.
I think that's an incredible answer, and recognizing their humanity and just saying, I meet you, I see you.
Right.
And so I loved your answers, and I hope that helped the audience. And I want to bring in another one. This gentleman says, I would love to hear how you balance your cartoon creating, photography, and writing. It seems like a lot, but you've figured out how to do all three very well. So now we're kind of transitioning into what is like a balanced life look like for you?
Yeah, and it's going to vary for everybody, isn't it? Thanks for the question, Ken. So my balancing act has changed over the years. When I first started writing online, I was doing a lot of cartooning. And I pretty much illustrated all of my essays with cartoons. It was very time consuming, Ken. In fact, my output of writing was slowed a bit because I had to illustrate all those articles. Now it paid off. It was popular and I gained a lot of followers. And then in recent years, as I've sort of embraced photography and street photography somewhat, I've been doing a little more of that and not as much cartooning. And so some of the folks that were following me that enjoyed the cartoons are probably disappointed or not seeing as much of them. Part of that was I was worried that the cartoons maybe were taking in a weird way, were taking away from the writing, that it were a gimmick or a novelty that got people to read the article. And I wanted people to read the article for the content of the article and not just for the cartoons. But to answer your question, I call it creative juggling. I try to balance my life around my passions, and I tend to work when I have the most energy. And then for me, I tend to read earlier in the day, feed my mind and go out and walk with my dogs and exercise. And then in the later part of the day and in the evening tends to be where my creative energy comes from the most. I know there's a million people out there writing about morning plans and how important it is to start your day with doing what you're good at. But I'm the opposite. I still get up fairly decent hour, but I tend to find that you have to leverage your creativity with your energy. And that can be hard when you're working. When I was the police chief, what I used to do is use my evenings and weekends to do writing and artwork. What I do now is when I go out, I try to remember to bring my camera whenever I go anywhere. I call this creative juggling with my time, where if I'm going out to dinner with my son, I throw my little Fujifilm X Pro 3 rangefinder on my shoulder and take it with me. Because sometimes I'm walking out of the restaurant, I see something, or I'm downtown running errands and I see something and I start taking some pictures. Whenever I travel, I bring it with me. And I carry a very small kit camera. It's a small little rangefinder, so it's easy to carry and inconspicuous. So that's one way, is always have the tools of your creativity around you. If you're a writer, have that notebook with you in your back pocket or in your car. I always have books in my car, so if I get stuck somewhere at a doctor appointment or waiting for someone, I can read at the airport while I'm waiting to pick up a friend. So the camera goes with me everywhere. My little notebooks go with me everywhere. I also take notes on my iPhone. So when I'm always writing, I hear snippets of conversations in, a Starbucks or a coffee shop, and I'm writing it down. I see an interesting person crossing the street, and I take a few pictures and I look for things that are going to inspire me. But it's hard to answer that question because everyone's schedules are different. And sometimes you're in a season of life where you're just really busy. You're raising your kids and you're going to work, and there's a narrow window there to feed your passions. And then what you have to do is make choices. You got to learn to say no to people, otherwise they'll spend your time for you. I had to learn that. I didn't like disappointing people, but I learned that I got to say no. And I did. I learned to say no. I quit golf because I realized I wasn't that good at it, and it was taking up so much time on a weekend that I could be writing or painting. So, I'm not doing as much painting right now. I like to get back to that, and I'm not doing as much cartooning, although I'd like to do a little more of that, doing a lot more photography and writing right now, because the writing has become kind of my focus. But I would say, listen to your energy, listen to your heart, and put the energy into that, and say no to people and things that waste your time, whether it's too much TV or too much social media. And you can get a lot more time out of your day than you realize.
John, that's awesome feedback for our audience. Even regardless, I know that people have to put their buckets into the things that apply to their own lives, but really what you're saying is you whatever you do, it's like have dog will travel, like
right.
Be a photographer, have camera as you travel, it's like, carry your pen and notebook. And as you move through your day and through life, you're using those tools that are your passion. And so that's great feedback. I have a lot of people asking about your photography. So they want to know, what are you doing now with your photography? And you answered a lot of that by, carrying the camera with you and everything. But I know that you're doing a little bit more with that. Where can people find that work? Is it through that main website? And let me bring that back in. And so our audience knows where to reach you.
Sure. Yeah. So the photography is a new creative passion of mine. And I think some of it was born out of its immediacy. To draw a cartoon or a painting takes time. And I love doing it. But I discovered street photography. I see you got a question here from Teresa. I discovered street photography a couple of years ago. There's a fellow named Sean D'Souza who has an amazing website called psychotactics.com, and he helps businesses for their branding and growing their businesses. But he also is a wonderful photographer. And he met me, or I met him years ago. We started a WhatsApp conversation. We've never met in person, but I feel like I know the guy. I have so much respect for him. He's just such a creative person. And Sean D'Souza, he also has a website with his photography called theotherseandesouza.com. Say that 3 times fast. But Sean inspired me with photography as well. He shared his photography. He's a black and white aficionado like me. I don't know why I became so enamored with black and white or monochromatic photography. Maybe it's the minimalist in me, but as I got older, I started simplifying my life. I started letting go of clutter. I simplified how I dress. I try to write more spare. I try to cut out everything that's superfluous and unnecessary. And so for me, I love color, but there's something dramatic, almost theatrical about black and white photography. I love the contrast. I love the elegance of it. I love the simplicity. And street photography is very consistent with that documentary and street photography of going out and capturing people in real life. Now, there's people on YouTube and all that are going out and introducing themselves to people and saying, "Hi, I'm a street photographer. I want to take your picture." And that's one form of photography, but that's not candid street photography. That is asking someone to do street portraiture, which is different. And that can be a lot of fun to do. It's much more difficult to do candid street photography where you're capturing moments in real life where people, just going about their lives and you're capturing those moments. And they can be beautiful moments or sad moments or just interesting moments, or maybe it's the light and the people moving through a scene that captures you. I know the photo when I see it, when I get it, I like the way it looks. I like a little bit of vignetting. So for me, I really enjoy going out and seeing what I can capture with street photography. I'd say I'm still new at it. I have a tremendous amount to learn, but I use my photography in my writing. What I love to do sometimes is take photographs of people or scenes and then make up stories around them. And I've done that with a few things that people have probably read. I have a picture of a guy in Scotland who has this huge owl on his arm, and I made up a whole story about that. It has nothing to do with Scotland or the guy with the owl, but it was a great jumping off point to use. So I like to use my street photography sometimes for stories, and it doesn't have to be about that person or that scene. And candid street photography is challenging because you have to find this balancing act between being very natural and walking around and taking pictures and not being creepy. I mean, when I was I was stuck in Carmel last month. I had given a eulogy for a friend's mother, and I couldn't come home because of the bad weather. I couldn't get back to Southern Nevada, so I ended up in Carmel, California, where I spent some time doing street photography. And I didn't share this in my writing, but I was down near a coffee shop one day near just outside of Carmel, and there was a woman sitting outside with her dog, and there was a guy inside and in the window, and he was praying. And it was an amazing photograph. And I'm in my car trying to take a picture of this, from a distance. And I get out of the car to go into the coffee shop, and this woman and her passenger drive up in a car, and they stop, and they have a little dog, and they look at me and they said, "Excuse me, but what are you doing? You're kind of creepy. Why are you out here taking pictures? Who are you taking pictures of?" And they're kind of freaked out. And I said, "Oh my gosh, no." I said, I do street photography. I like to take candid pictures of people. My name's John Weiss. I have a website. I can give you the name of the website. And but because I was in my car, I look more like a private eye or something than I did. So street photography is challenging. To do it in a way that doesn't turn people off is hard. But boy, it's so much fun when you capture beautiful moments or inspiring scenes. And I really enjoy it. And it's a great way to feed my creativity from my writing. And that's why I do it.
Ah, well, thank you for sharing. And I think, like you said, when you're marrying the two, the photography and the story writing, that's really blending on your skill. And I like that aspect.
Right.
And what I wanted to add to the black and white is that is balance of itself, the black and the white, and it's these, it's the yin and the yang. And then we had another comment from one of our viewers. He said, black and white imagery is an abstract we see in color. So we're going to go to our last commercial. And John, if you have a little bit more time today, I'd love to we have a guest from Berlin, Germany, and I really love the question that she has.
Sure.
And so when we come back, we're going to dive into that for a minute. And
sounds good.
Stay tuned.
Attract your audience. She can take you in a place in yourself that you can't go by yourself. So go to KimJacobsConsulting.com. That's KimJacobsConsulting.com. Did I say KimJacobsConsulting.com? Yes, you did. Very good. Make sure you go there and sign up for the coaching, and we're looking forward to working with you. You have something special. You have greatness within you.
For our audience or those that don't know, Les Brown is the world's foremost motivational speaker. And he's absolutely incredible. And Kim Jacobs is my coach. And so she's a powerhouse to be in connection with. So moving forward, I definitely want to dive a little deeper. Let's put this on the platform here. And let's take a look at this question. Hi, John. I have been following your writing and art for some time. I was wondering how you managed the emotional transition from the police force to artistic ventures. Greetings from Berlin, Germany. This is from Hannah.
Well, hello, Hannah from beautiful Germany. My father would love that because he was a huge fan of Germany, being German himself, and Vienna, and a student of the Habsburg Empire and Franz Joseph. Oh, he loved all that. So the emotional transition from police force to artistic ventures. Well, art was actually always with me, Hannah, through my entire 26 years in law enforcement. In fact, in many ways, it was art and creativity that were the ballast that I leaned on, that supported me during some difficult times in my career. It was like a good friend that I could always rely on. I always knew after a difficult day or a graveyard shift, or if I'd been through some difficult incidents or struggles at work, I could come home, and certainly my family was another refuge. But But my creative life, I could go into my office, my studio, and it was my own world. And so I relied on art and creativity during my career to keep me a little bit sane. It was the beautiful place that I could go to where I could paint beautiful paintings, or I could write moving stories, or I could draw silly cartoons to make myself laugh and others laugh. So creativity and art was a refuge for me. So in many ways, it was the art that kept me emotionally balanced. I think if I didn't have that, I think my career would have been more difficult. I was lucky where I worked. We didn't have, a lot of really serious crime. We didn't have drive-bys and things like that. But we had crime like every other city, and so I certainly saw plenty of that. And I've been to plenty of difficult scenes and death scenes and accidents and suicides and children that had to be taken away from parents that were harming them. So I certainly saw my fair share of ugliness in society, and art for me was that refuge, that place I could go to when I came home to escape, as well as books and reading. And so when I made a decision that near the end of my career, I had about 5 years to go before I could retire. And I just decided that I wanted to retire early, that I was ready for a transition. I was ready to live a creative life. And so I gave up a few years of retirement income in order to make that transition and become a full-time writer and artist. And it was a good decision for me. I think everyone has to make their own decisions about when they're ready for a change in their lives. I was far enough along in my career where I could afford to make that transition. But it was a good one for me to make. It was a healthy one to make. I think if I stayed 5 more years, I would have been stressed. I could have done it, but I think it would have taken a toll on my health. And so making that change was a good thing. So I don't know where you are in your life, but definitely if you have a creative practice, whether it's music, art, dance, it doesn't matter. Whatever the thing is that feeds your soul, that makes your heart go a twitter, invest in that. Whether you're working and you can't afford to make a transition. And some people, their passion can't be their profession. There's some things there's not enough money in it. I mean, street photography, I love it, but there's not really any money in it. So that alone, it's very hard. There's 1 or 2 people maybe that make a living at it. But that doesn't mean you can't pursue that as your escape and as your passion. And that's a great way to balance your life from the struggles of work and raising a family and all the other things we deal with in life.
Oh, we had a nice comment here. Don't be sad it's over. Be happy it happened.
That's good advice, Charlie.
Yeah, that is good advice.
Yeah.
Well, John, you have been such an exceptional guest on the Wellness Driven Life Show, and you have written a few books. And so I want to make sure that people have access to that. And as we come to closing, I have on the bottom here where the audience can reach you. That's www.johnpweiss.com. And again, we're curious about for the photos. Do you sell your photos, and is that through your website?
So no, I'm not selling photos currently. I've been using them to illustrate my articles. It is something that I'm thinking about. I've been thinking about bringing back both my fine art paintings and photography and trying to pair them. When I was in Carmel, stranded that weekend, I talked to a gallerist down there, and it got my mind thinking about, boy, it would be interesting to maybe add that back into my life, is to start painting again and pairing some photography. That'd be kind of a fun thing to have paintings and photography, in a gallery to sell. So that's something I'm looking into, but I may down the road sell photography, photographs or books of my photography when I get to that point.
This is definitely testimony to you that it is desired, sir.
Yeah, that's wonderful.
Which is great. John, it's been such a pleasure. Is there anything else that you want to share with our audience today?
Well, just first, again, thank you, April, for having me on your program. I would say that your past doesn't equal your future. I've met some people who struggled in life and then reinvented themselves. And I think sometimes people beat themselves up because they feel like they haven't achieved what they want to achieve, or they've made mistakes, or they've hurt people in their lives. And I just feel like it's important to remind people that your past does not equal your future. If you want to change your life, you can do it. You can do it step by step. And sometimes it's not easy. Sometimes you have to make amends for things you've done in the past that you regret. But I just really believe in the power of people to reinvent themselves and to change and to have a better future. So that's just my little parting shot there, that your past doesn't equal your future. You can always improve your life, both your health, your relationships, your passions. You can right the wrongs of the past if you've made some mistakes. You can also learn to forgive yourself too if you've made mistakes. I think that's really important, because all of us have to carry our mistakes with us, but that doesn't define us. What defines us is who we are today and tomorrow. So your past doesn't equal your future.
Beautiful words of wisdom. Well worth replay. And I want to say to our audience, definitely you can find John's information in the description below. If you just so happen to be watching the replay of the show, you can still leave comments and we will do our best to get back with you and answer that. And reach John through his website. And what I want to remind everyone is it is because of you that the Wellness Driven Life Show is possible through your generous donations. When you donate through the website at www.thewellnessdrivenlifeshow.com, you will be gifted with this beautiful follow-up email, and you can keep that for your records. So again, John, thank you so much. It has been
Thank you.
Awesome having you on the show. You truly have been a light, and I love all of the wisdom and the beautiful aspects that you are giving back to the world. And I want to say to everyone, goodbye for now. Thank you so much. And we will see you tomorrow.